Welcome to the June Town Hall training. I'm Brandy Haley and we'll be facilitating our training today with the focus on how to properly document compliance with the Arkansas State Board of Nursing Education Standards Part 125. Our goal is to make sure every program, regardless of size, structure, or credential level, understands exactly what evidence is needed to demonstrate compliance. This training includes examples, explanations, and practical documentation strategies. These objectives guide our session. The standards are detailed, but the documentation doesn't have to be overwhelming. We'll walk through each section of Part 125 and translate the regulatory language into practical, real-world documentation examples. This training applies to all faculty, administrators, and support staff involved in nursing education programs. While many of you also have medication assistant training programs, this training is specific to nursing programs. If you understand what evidence is needed to meet educational standards when it is time for your medication assistance survey, you will follow the same process of providing evidence showing compliance. The Educational Standards Part 125 are the backbone of nursing program regulation in Arkansas. These standards outline what every nursing program must have in place to operate legally and maintain approval. Part 125 covers everything from how a new program is established to how faculty are qualified, to what must be included in the curriculum, and to how programs evaluate themselves. It applies to every nursing education program in the state, regardless of size, credential, or institutional type. The purpose of these standards is to ensure that all programs consistently prepare graduates who are competent, safe, and ready for licensure. They also ensure fairness and consistency across institutions. Part 125 is not optional. It is the regulatory foundation that determines whether a program receives initial approval, maintains full approval, or is placed on conditional status. Most importantly, Part 125 requires that programs demonstrate compliance. That means having documentation, artifacts, and evidence that show the program is meeting each standard. This is why today's training focuses so heavily on documentation, because the standards themselves require it. Part 125 is an ASBN rule regulated by the Arkansas Nurse Practice Act and is found under the Laws and Rules tab on the ASBN website. Not only is it important that you understand where to find the educational standards, but we want you to understand how to read them. The program requirements begin in subpart 2 of the document. The citation for each specific rule will be bold and starts with 17 CAR 125. But what does that number mean to you? You see 17 CAR 125-201 circled. That is the regulatory reference number. Each part of the number tells you where the rule lives inside Arkansas law. Here's the breakdown. 17 refers to Title 17 of the Arkansas Code. Title 17 covers professions, occupations, and businesses. CAR stands for Code of Arkansas Rules. This is the official accumulation of all state agency rules. 125 is the section of the Arkansas State Board of Nursing rules that governs standards for nursing education programs. 201 is the specific rule section within Part 125. So 125-201 refers to the rule titled Administration and Organization. Understanding these numbers helps you cite the correct standard in your survey report, organize your documents, communicate clearly with surveyors, and ensures your documentation aligns with the exact rule being evaluated. Also, when you write, the program meets 17 CAR 125-201 requirements for administration and organization. You are showing that you know exactly which rule you are addressing and that your evidence is tied to the correct standard. Understanding this regulation verbiage will help you understand the summary report from the survey and be able to understand the discussion during the ASBN Education Committee meetings and board business meetings. The big question: why does documentation matter? Why is it important? Providing evidence is not just a bureaucratic requirement. It's the backbone of demonstrating compliance with the Arkansas State Board of Nursing Educational Standards Part 125. When the board reviews your program, they aren't just looking for verbal reassurances. They want proof that your program is meeting every requirement outlined in Part 125. Evidence protects your program's approval status. Whether you're seeking initial approval, maintaining full approval, or responding to a conditional approval situation, documentation is what shows the board that you are meeting expectations consistently and effectively. Your program's approval status is vital to your students. Without your program holding an approval status, you cannot admit or graduate students. Without approval status, graduates will not be authorized to take the NCLEX. Documentation also ensures transparency. It shows how decisions are made, how curriculum is structured, how faculty are qualified, and how your students are supported. This transparency is essential not only for regulators, but also for students, faculty, and institutional leadership. Another key point is success. When your documentation clearly shows alignment between standards, curriculum, and outcomes, it strengthens your program's ability to demonstrate that students are being prepared for safe practice and NCLEX success. Good documentation also prepares you for surveys, whether they are paper or on-site. When everything is organized and up to date, surveys become smoother, faster, and are far less stressful. Finally, documentation reduces institutional risk. Nursing programs operate under strict regulatory oversight, and incomplete or missing documentation can lead to findings of noncompliance, conditional approval, or even withdrawal of approval. Thorough documentation shows accountability, protects the program, and ensures long-term stability. This is why the rest of the training focuses not only on what the standards say, but on what evidence is needed to show that you meet them. This slide is critical because it connects regulatory documentation to something every nurse understands: clinical documentation. In nursing practice, students are taught if they didn't document an assessment, an intervention, or a medication administration, then legally and professionally it did not occur. The same principle applies to nursing education programs. You may be doing everything right, following policies, teaching required content, maintaining ratios, orienting your faculty, but if there is no documentation, you cannot verify compliance. When surveyors review your program, they cannot rely on verbal explanations or good intentions. They must see the evidence. They're looking for policies, minutes, evaluations, agreements, data, and artifacts that prove the standard is being met. This is why, when writing your survey report, you should consistently ask yourself, do I have evidence to back this up? If the answer is no, then the program must either gather the evidence or adjust the written statement. This is a mindset shift from doing to proving. It's essential for maintaining approval and demonstrating accountability. Standard 125-201, Administration and Organization, focuses on your program structure. Your documentation should clearly show who reports to whom, how decisions are made, and how the program fits within the larger institution. Job descriptions must match actual duties. Surveyors will look for alignment. Common areas of deficiencies include organizational charts that are not up to date, job descriptions that do not align with Part 125, especially the education requirements for faculty or the actual work that is being done. For Standard 125-202, Philosophy and Graduate Competencies, surveyors want to see that your philosophy isn't just a statement. It should drive your curriculum. A curriculum map is one of the strongest pieces of evidence here. A great best practice that many of our schools are already doing, and if you have listened in on the education committee meetings, you have heard this recommendation. And that is to show how your course learning objectives are tied directly to your program outcomes. The slide gives you examples of what you can use as evidence to show such compliance. Common areas of lacking evidence include a lack of documentation showing how programs are aligning the philosophy to program learning outcomes to the curriculum. I've given you an example of an easy way to show that if you do not want to create a table outlining such. See the last bullet point. Another common area lacking evidence is faculty meeting minutes not showing how decisions are made. A great way to correct that is to document what faculty discussed and then voted on. Was the vote unanimous? Did the vote pass or fail? Let your faculty meeting minutes tell a story. If you need an example of faculty meeting minutes that reflects such suggestions, please email me and I can provide you with an example. For Standard 125-203 resources, surveyors are looking for student support to their learning. Surveyors often ask students whether they can access materials, so documentation should show availability and adequacy. This is an area where most schools do show compliance, but the most common lack of evidence includes the last bullet point, resource acquisition. That means, how does your nursing program get resources needed for teaching? This oftentimes centers around your budget. Go back to your faculty meeting minutes. Is there documentation that faculty had input into the budget? Is there documentation in your faculty meeting minutes? What resources were discussed that were needed and if any action was taken? For example, this could be a new overhead projector for the classroom, or computers that are needed, or possibly a new textbook or study material for students. Facilities must support learning and safety. For Standard 125-204, surveyors are looking for evidence. Clinical agreements must be current and reviewed annually. This is a common area of deficiency. This slide gives you examples of how you can show compliance with this standard. Another common area lacking is the last bullet point, specifically missing signs posted in the classroom or lab of evacuation routes. Safety compliance documentation must exist. For Standard 125-205 personnel, this is where your documentation is critical, outlining you have qualified personnel. Surveyors will check licensure, qualifications, and ratios. Keep faculty files complete and updated. If your department does not house those documents, you will need to let whatever department does house, which is usually HR, know that you need proof. You can certainly redact private information, Surveyors do not need to see drug screens, evaluations, performance measures, or immunization records of your personnel. Evidence that is needed include resumes or CVs, transcripts, orientation checklist, and licensure verification. For licensure verification, please make sure you're printing the NERCI.com record and not the ASBN license verification record. This is because unencumbered status must be checked. Your meeting minutes should have documented who all was in attendance. Otherwise, how will you prove it was a faculty meeting? Where are you documenting that you are meeting your clinical ratio? Is that on your SEP, or do you have a meeting with each course or clinical coordinator? Avoid those hallway conversations that are oftentimes not documented. Remember, you must have the review documented somewhere. For Standard 125-206, specifically looks at preceptors. Preceptors are not counted in faculty-student ratios, but they must meet specific qualifications. Documentation must show how you are communicating back and forth with your preceptors, what oversight is given to preceptors and students, and how are preceptors evaluated. For Standard 125-207, we're going to look specifically at students. Oftentimes, your handbook is all that is needed for the surveyor to see policy. If a site visit is required, students are asked where they would find this information and if they understand progression and appeal processes. Governance is a common area that programs fail to document compliance. Remember, your students are key stakeholders. They have a voice, and you must show how that voice is part of your program governance. There must be policies in place for that governance. It is up to each program to determine what that governance looks like. But remember, transparency is key. Your students need to understand how their voice matters, and that is not just through completing course evaluations. Get them involved in curriculum development as deemed appropriate. Let them see the work you are doing behind the scene. You all do so much more than walk into a classroom or clinical. Show them how involved curriculum development and evaluation is. Show them how policy is developed for the program and all the approval status steps that is needed for that policy. Nursing education is a specialty area. Show your students and involve them in that specialty area. You may just plant a seed that drives them into nursing education one day. Standard 125-208 deals with student publications. This standard and the previous student standard are usually lumped together for evidence. Outdated publications are a major compliance issue and one of the most common findings during a survey. Everything must match: the catalog, the website, the handbook, and internal documents. Make sure your criminal background check rules are current. That is the most common error in this section of Part 125. Standard 129-209 Educational Program. This is a common standard section that I've seen some deficiencies. I know our programs are doing these, but there is a lack of evidence documenting such. Regarding curriculum requirements, the curriculum must include essential entry-level content. Courses must be logical, sequential, and aligned with competencies. Clinical experiences must reflect professional conduct expectations. Required content areas include federal and state patient care guidelines, infectious disease content, emergency preparedness, genetics, end-of-life care, Legal and Ethical Nursing, which includes the Arkansas Nurse Practice Act. This standard is one of the most detailed because it outlines exactly what must be included in the curriculum. Surveyors will look for alignment between your philosophy, competencies, and course sequencing. Documentation should include syllabi, curriculum maps, and evidence that theory is taught before related clinical experiences. Surveyors will also check that required content areas such as emergency preparedness and legal ethical practices are clearly embedded in the curriculum. When writing your survey report, ask yourself, where is the evidence that each required content area is taught, assessed, and reinforced? You will be required to complete a curriculum map table that outlines all the requirements listed in this standard. You will also be asked to upload syllabi. A best practice is to upload syllabi that you include in the curriculum map table. The survey will verify what is included in the curriculum map actually matches what is in the syllabi, so be consistent. If you have any other program tables that show how or where the required curriculum content is taught, that is also acceptable to include. For Standard 125-209 simulation requirements, this is another common area seen with deficiencies. Remember, you must demonstrate that you have adequate resources, which include physical, human, and material. You must show you have qualified simulation leadership. You must show that faculty has training and ongoing development. You must show appropriate facilities and you have working equipment. You need to provide proof of written policies for simulation, integration, debriefing, and orientation. There must be evaluation criteria for simulation activities. This includes student evaluations of the simulation experience. We all know that simulation is a powerful tool, but it must be used correctly. Surveyors will expect to see documentation that simulation is intentionally integrated, not used as a last-minute substitute. Evidence should include policies, faculty training laws, simulation schedules, debriefing procedures, and evaluation tools. If your program uses simulation heavily, this section becomes a major focus of compliance. Remember, if you claim simulation meets certain objectives, you must show evidence that the simulation is designed, delivered, and evaluated according to best practices. Make sure you have a section in your simulation policy or your faculty handbook that references the requirements listed in this standard. For example, a best practice is to have a section about the framework, best practices used, and/or evidence-based practice used. In addition, you must have a policy on how all faculty are oriented to simulation. Finally, you must show how simulation learning outcomes are linked directly to curriculum outcomes. The most common finding of lack of evidence in this section is a lack of having short and long-term goals. Remember, just having a goal is not enough. You must show how those goals are evaluated and the outcomes are measured. I do have examples of how to write short and long-term simulation goals. If you need such examples, please email me. For Standard 125-210 Earn to Learn, this program allows students to gain clinical credit through paid employment, but it must be carefully documented. Surveyors will look for evidence that the work experience aligns with the course objectives and that faculty maintain oversight. Programs must track hours, competencies, evaluations, and employer verification. This is an area where programs often do the work but fail to document it thoroughly, which means compliance cannot always be verified. Ensure that your Learn to Earn documentation is complete, consistent, and tied directly to your program learning outcomes. For Standard 125-11 program evaluation, this refers to each program having a required written systematic evaluation plan. Evaluation should include NCLEX pass rates, program completion rates, graduate employer surveys, job placement data, faculty and student feedback. Those are a few examples of how you are evaluating your program. Evaluation results must be used for ongoing program improvement. Documentation must show what data was collected, how the analysis was performed, what decisions were made, if there were actions implemented, and the evaluation of any follow-up. This standard is all about continuous quality improvement, and it is one of the most important sections of Part 125. A program cannot simply collect data. It must show that the data is analyzed, discussed, and used to make improvements. That is the definition of ongoing. Surveyors will look for a written evaluation plan, evidence that the plan is actually followed, meeting minutes showing discussion of the outcomes, documentation of any changes made based on evaluation results, follow-up data showing whether the change was effective. This is where programs often fall short. They collect data, but they do not document how it was used. Remember the theme of this training. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. When writing your survey report, ask yourself, can I show evidence of the full cycle? Data leads to analysis, leads to decision, leads to action, leads to evaluation. If not, the program may not fully be meeting Standard 125-11. This is a screenshot of what each program's ASBN shared Google Drive will look like. Currently, only programs that have a survey in 2026 or 2027 have a folder. If that is not applicable to you and you would like a folder created for you, please email me and I will get that created. When you open your program folder, you'll see the templates folder and the year survey folder. These two folders house subfolders you will use. The two documents shown are to guide you. Please review the guidelines for nursing program surveys document. That document gives you specific documents and instructions on what folder to upload. You can customize the subfolders on the right if you choose. For example, when you open the ASBN Curriculum Map Table folder, which is the third folder, if you want to create a yearly folder for uploading that map, showing that your program reviews it yearly, feel free to do so. My ask, though, is that you do not disturb the format of these two screenshots. All program folders are set up in this same format you see on the screen. But again, feel free to personalize beyond the second screenshot on the right. This slide is essential to how evidence is evaluation. It helps faculty and directors understand how surveys actually evaluate compliance. Many programs believe they are meeting the standards, and often they are, but they struggle to demonstrate it because their documentation doesn't meet the criteria surveys are using. Surveyors look for evidence that is clear, easy to understand, up to date, and covers all required elements. If documentation is outdated or inconsistent, it could raise red flags. Consistency seems to be a major issue across many of our programs. Surveyors will compare your handbook, catalog, website, and internal policies. If these sources contradict each other, the program may be considered out of compliance, even if the program is doing the right thing operationally. Traceability is another key concept. Documentation should show who made decisions, when those decisions were made, why the decisions were made, and how they were implemented. This refers directly back to your meeting minutes, sign-in sheets, and revision logs. Those are powerful tools here for compliance. Surveyors will also look for alignment. Your philosophy should align with your competencies, which should align with your curriculum, which should align with your assessment and outcomes. If any piece is out of sync, it could signal a gap in compliance. Finally, surveyors cannot accept verbal explanations. If something is not documented, it cannot be counted as evidence. This is why programs must maintain strong, organized, and accessible documentation systems. One major pitfall is having policies that are not followed or documented as followed. Surveyors look for evidence that policies are implemented consistently, not just written. Meeting minutes are another weak spot. Many programs record attendance, but not decisions, rationales, or follow-up actions. Surveyors need to see the entire story of how the program evaluates itself and makes improvements. Inconsistency across publications is another major compliance issue. If your handbook says one thing, your website says another, and your catalog says something else, surveyors may mark this as non-compliance, even if the program is functioning correctly. Clinical agreements are often expired or missing annual review documentation. This is one of the easiest things to fix and one of the most common findings. Faculty files must be complete and current. Missing transcripts, outdated license, or absence orientation records can be red flags. Curriculum maps must reflect the current curriculum. If the curriculum changes but the map doesn't, surveyors will see a misalignment. Another big pitfall is programs collecting data but not analyzing it or using it for improvement. Standard 125-211 requires a full evaluation cycle, not just data collection. Simulation area documentation is often incomplete. Programs must show policies, training, debriefing methods, evaluation criteria, and resource adequacy. Finally, evidence stored in multiple places can lead to inconsistency. Surveyors need to see a clear, organized system. The key message: don't wait until a survey is approaching. Evidence should be updated continuously as part of a normal program operation. This system not only supports compliance, it also strengthens communication, transparency, and accountability across the program. Every program that has a survey approaching has an ASBN shared program folder file. Again, if you do not have a survey in 26 or 27 and you want a folder created, just email me and I will get access started. Once you have access to the folder, you will want to access the document in your folder titled Guidelines for Surveys. This document walks you through every piece of evidence that will prove you are meeting each standard. In closing, please remember that documentation equals proof of compliance. Ask yourself, do I have evidence to support this statement? Would a surveyor reach the same conclusion from my documentation? Arkansas nursing education programs are doing great work. Please make sure you are documenting that great work. Thank you for attending. The next town hall is scheduled for Friday, July the 10th. That training is titled Compass and Clipboard. New Director Orientation. This training will be for new directors or those needing a refresher and will focus on understanding the director role, responsibilities, and requirements to direct the nursing programs according to the educational standards. Any new director hired in 2025 or later should attend. This training was recorded separately and is now being uploaded to the ASBN website.